I'm Sarah Kavanaugh, and this is Peaceful Exit, the podcast where we talk to creatives about life and death. My guest today is Lauren Canaday, and her memoir is Independence Ave, How Individualism Killed Me and Community Brought Me Back. Lauren's story is so remarkable. She experienced sudden cardiac arrest. She didn't have a heartbeat for 24 minutes and survived. In our conversation, Lauren shares more about her life leading up to that moment and what recovery has been like after being declared, amazingly, cognitively intact. We also tease apart this very American ideal that is independence, when it serves us and when it does not. Well, welcome to Peaceful Exit.
Hi.
I was so excited to meet you.
Oh, me too, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Well, you've lived quite a life, and I love your career because it really is, it's a career of connections and changes and transitions. And I also love in your book how you connect your childhood and early adulthood to your drive for independence and autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that drive?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had a role model for that drive in my father, for sure. My parents were pretty poor when I was born. They had married against the wishes of their family. So they didn't have a lot of support and they had to work really hard. My father was in school still when I was born. So luckily they were educated. They had that opportunity. And I really watched my parents grow up and my father become actually, quite well to do. And so he sort of represented like the American dream and, this meritocracy that we live in. He was this embodiment of that just right there in my everyday awareness. And I think seeing his success really inspired me to want a lot of the same like worldly, outward status and comfort and all these things. It felt like it was something that was within my grasp and up to me to go out and get at first. And I'll say too that I watched them get divorced when I was 17. Of course, that's in the book. And that was very hard. And I think was the final push of like, all right, well, I've seen some models and now it's up to me to decide what my life is going to become. And so I felt strongly about, securing my financial future. And I was just responsible to a fault and really no fun.
I doubt that. But we're all socialized in this country for independence. So
yeah.
I'm really curious about how your childhood taught you to ignore your body cues.
Yeah. Well, my parents did a lot of great things. I do feel that the way they treated emotion, I think just to get through the day, like their days were hard. They had 3 kids. They were juggling a lot. And so, yeah, there was not a lot of encouragement of expression in some ways. And so I talk in the book about the no whining button that was, one of those little pins. My father got at like a rest stop, I think, on a car trip. So he did a lot of driving around in the car on weekends. I was whining. I tended to get car sick and he like put that button on my shirt and they had a good laugh. And it was really, I'm sure they didn't intend for it to affect me this way, but it was really hurtful at the time. And I thought, if this is how it didn't seem that my emotions and expressing them were really, that wasn't going to get me closeness with others. It wasn't going to get me what I want, wasn't going to get me out of that car. So I kind of learned to try to rise above the situation, which at the time, as a coping mechanism meant, keeping things to myself, listening music, tuning out, as opposed to tuning in. But meanwhile, I did become, I think, hypersensitive to sometimes when your own emotions aren't allowed to really flourish and come out, you tend to become very cautious of then other people's emotions. Like you can tell yours aren't steering where things are headed. So you kind of turn outward. So, both of those things were happening at the same time. I was becoming very observant, but very quiet with my own drive.
Yeah. Well, that resonates with me as well. And you get lost in your head and your imagination,
Yes.
which is why you love writing.
Yes, probably. I did so much reading that probably was inevitable at some point. that I
Yeah, you were living in those worlds. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I love words and language, and I talk a lot about that in this podcast. And I'm curious about your use of independence versus dependence. When talking about community, I often use the word interdependence. How did you choose that language, or did it just come up for you? And do you think the words dependence and interdependence are interchangeable?
Well, start at the end. I don't think they're interchangeable. I think they're getting at slightly different ideas. I think one in our culture definitely has a negative connotation. Dependence has a little bit of a negative connotation in most contexts, and it makes us think maybe as codependence and like, that's a bad word. Independence is like you can take care of yourself. You got it. It's up to you. Dependent being, like you require help from others. And then interdependence is kind of this idea. I don't have the exact definition for me, but it's like a little bit of both. Like you're helping other people. They're helping you. It's kind of a mutually beneficial situation is how I think about it. And so before I was diagnosed with epilepsy, so up to age 34, independence was my jam. I don't think I would have. And if I were talking about dependence, I would have used the word interdependence for sure. I definitely never use the word dependent in relation to myself.
Right.
Until this point. However, things changed when I started having a lot of health crises, and especially after the sudden cardiac arrest, where I was so dependent on other people. I mean, there's really just no other way to look at it. Biologically and on every level, like I was just completely dependent on others to fight for my life. I had absolutely no role in it. I was truly dead to the world, literally, for a few minutes. And so, even in recovery after that, having had these experiences of where my body's out of control, I'm having a seizure or dropping dead, like to me, dependence had a role in my life now. Not that I'm constantly dependent on everyone for everything, but that word and the full weight of it has a place in my life for sure.
I love your distinction, actually. And that makes so much sense. When you have medical crises, we are dependent for our survival. Yeah, yeah. So a little bit of history. You went to college, studied statistics. I like how you wrote about, I actually started as a math major.
Did you really? Oh, wow. That's so cool.
I ended up as an English major. I like to study everything, so I couldn't decide.
I relate to that.
Yeah. And then you made a big pivot to big hair, as you say. And how did you go from being a statistician to being a hairstylist?
Well, I wasn't happy as a statistician. That was a rough year. And I knew pretty quickly, like it was going to be a tough road if I kept going down it. I was doing fine at work, but it was not fun. And I was like wasting away emotionally and spiritually or something. Meanwhile, my father remarried, and he married a hairstylist, a hair designer, as she would say. And she had worked with the same company for quite a while, like over a decade as she had. And I think getting to know her and seeing what her world was like and her career, her lifestyle, it opened up this door. And then that show, What Not to Wear, I was sort of obsessed with that one summer, and like just seeing the fact that everyone would start crying when they got to the hair fade. Like, they could get different outfits on, and it was interesting, whatever. They were like, okay, I'm changing, whatever. Then they got to the hair scene. A lot of times people just break down. It was so personal. And the hairstylist was able to just really hone in on like what's motivating you, like where do you want to go with your life? How can we bring this, this inner thing and like put it on the surface so that when other people interact with you, your image speaks to what you really want to say. And it was so powerful to watch that show and see hair done well. That just intrigued me. And then I was sort of at least end because my ex-husband was getting deployed. And so I had to move anyway. I was up, upheaval again, and decided this is as good a chance as any. I might as well just try this thing. So I started just getting my hands dirty and was an intern, just started doing, you can kind of get classes for free in some states if you work for the salon. So I tried that. I fell in love with it, and I just like grew really fast. So yeah, even when I got started, like day one, I don't think you could have told me where it would go. I thought I might just be biding time while I figured out what my next move was, but it stuck for about 12 years.
You collected so much wisdom working with hundreds of female clients, including this one piece that really resonates with me. If you mind if I read it?
Sure, come in.
Just a quick quote. Whatever compartmentalization we front to the world, the main joys and griefs of our lives are thoroughly entangled in the jungles of our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still feel that holds true?
I do. And actually, interestingly, I wrote that when I was still doing hair, before I was diagnosed with epilepsy, before I started writing for real. I mean, that was just something I wrote down in my journal, and it still does ring true to me. As I was consulting later for the federal government and for other organizations, like I saw it there too. I mean, just the way that people try to keep, different lanes, different parts of life. But I think ultimately we have to bring it all together. Like something's going to force us to get clarity on what matters most, and all the stuff in the other compartments that aren't serving that, they're going to fall away or be affected.
I wonder too, like as you grew up without the freedom to express your emotions, that actually develops those lanes of, because you have to compartmentalize. If you have a strong emotion about something, you kind of have to put it in a box on the shelf. And so there's a compartment, and then you're going along with your, professional life, but something's happening in your personal life. Well, I can't bring that into the professional life because I have to be successful and productive. And, that actually you end up being very good at compartmentalizing because you were unable to pull those things together.
Well, and I had a lot of romantic relationship trouble soon after writing that. And yeah, I mean, so yes, 100%. And that was very astute, by the way. And I just have to laugh. I always learn stuff with interviews like this. So, I mean, yeah, anyway, I always learn, and it's so interesting what you just said, because I have had therapists and everything. No one put it quite like that, but you're right. When you have to compartmentalize and not show one emotion, it comes out somewhere.
Always. And, it really, I'm much older than you, but it really struck me that you can't shut off one emotion without shutting them all off. Yeah. And so you really have to exist in that compartment where you're separate from what, your intuition, your emotion, I so appreciated how candidly you wrote about your divorce and your failed relationships, your realization that you didn't want to have kids, the emotional cost of moving around so much. That's a lot of processing. And I was wondering if writing this book was cathartic for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was definitely healing for me to write the book. I kind of had no choice. Like it was beyond healing. It was like required for continued existence because it just, like I said earlier, I mean, it poured out of me. I couldn't stop writing it. I wanted to sometimes, to be honest. I definitely didn't want to publish it many times. Still now, like every time, an opportunity to speak about it comes up or whatever, I'm a little squeamish, but writing it was essential to my survival. Yeah. I think just looking back and making it into a story, like, so it's not just random events that happen. And I get to make meaning of it. I don't get to decide what happens to me. But by not just writing the book, but even if I hadn't published, just, writing these things in my journal even is a step of making sense of it and deciding what to do about what I was given to work with.
Yeah. You have control over your reaction to what you were given.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For certain. So at 34, you started having seizures and was diagnosed with epilepsy. That put a wrench in things, I would imagine.
Yeah, you could say that.
What was it like being forced to slow down?
I have this distinct memory of it a day soon after the seizures started. I hadn't been diagnosed yet, but I knew it was bad. And I felt like I would imagine an animal of prey would feel like in the forest, like you're just wandering around, like something really scary is out there. And my nervous system went into freeze mode. I mean, slowing down later when I felt a little better, it was hard. But at first, it was just natural. It was just my body was like, okay, something big is happening. And we just like, it's just not even a question. So I became very still. I craved silence. I had these really long commutes for a while until I could sort out living situation with the fact that I couldn't drive. And I was on public transportation a lot. And when I was just sitting there for hours and I had my headphones on, but I did a lot of just sitting and staring, which was so not my MO before that.
How would you describe epilepsy?
As a definition overall or for me?
Both. Like scientifically, what is it and how would you describe it?
Seizures can happen to anyone, but if there's abnormal discharges in the brain, so like an electrical spike, it actually, a lot of times people assume that things go haywire and are all disorganized. It's actually everything fires at once. It's a very everything goes at the same time, which isn't how it's supposed to work. It's visible on an EEG, but really it's a default diagnosis because there's a lot of reasons that a person might have a seizure, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they have one of the known syndromes. So if you have unexplained lack of consciousness or there's actually other types that are aware. So you don't necessarily pass out. Mine, I passed out. I can both look like the whole 9 yards. But some people, it's a lot more subtle. Like they might just pause and stare. But if you have these things and you can't attribute it to anything else, and they try, looking for a disease or a tumor or all different things, your heart, they can't find another cause, then you may get tagged with this epilepsy diagnosis. So ultimately, what does it mean? It depends. In my case, with the generalized tonic-clonic or what's historically was called grand mal seizures, it's probably what people picture.
Well, given your independence and obviously you knew how to do your hair and you looked well, and was it hard to imagine yourself on the ground convulsing?
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen myself have what we thought were focal aware seizures, but they weren't. I wasn't passing out, but I had trouble moving and speaking. I have seen a couple of those. That's weird enough, but I can't imagine. I mean, yeah, and my first seizure was so public. There were, over a dozen witnesses, and so I never had the chance to think about keeping it a secret. It was brought to my attention by others, so it's weird, but it's just so outside of my control.
It must be humbling.
Very, yeah.
Yeah. Were you lonely? I mean, you were navigating this new life, but did it feel lonely?
Yeah, it often did. Sometimes I made connections through it in terms of joining support groups, and I had some really great doctors along the way, but it also took a toll on a lot of my existing relationships. One of the things that shocked me was how much it impacted my social life to not drink, because once I was on the seizure medication, I couldn't drink with it. And so I just, cut out drinking. And when I first did, I didn't think much of it, but very quickly I found that, I wasn't invited around as much. And honestly, I didn't want to go to things this much because I started noticing everyone around me was drinking all the time. Hadn't really noticed it before, but once once I couldn't, it became a bigger deal. And that, yeah, I mean, I had been the girlfriend who, you come over, I make you a cocktail. And I wouldn't say I was a heavy drinker, at least not for someone in their 30s and in DC at that time. But it was definitely a part of life that just disappeared. And my social life kind of went with it. And then on top of that, I was having to go to sleep early. I got overstimulated really quickly. I don't know if that was epilepsy or the med, There are a lot of reasons that I think it was partly other people not knowing what to say or not knowing how to be there for me with this bizarre ailment all of a sudden. And partly me backing away from things that I used to enjoy because my niece had suddenly changed overnight. So that made it lonely sometimes. And of course, stigma. I had a few instances of people, more overtly saying like, I don't want to deal with this. So there's a coworker who it's always lodged in my memory of how she literally said she would run away in the other direction if I had a seizure. This is someone, I'd worked with closely for years at that point. And it just kind of made me realize that I was now in some different class of person. Like I was not the person I used to be. I had a totally different status now. I was some scary disabled person. I was a liability.
They were afraid.
Yeah, and it was going to change. It was going to change how I interacted in some cases. So,
yeah, that makes sense. So, how much time between your epilepsy diagnosis and your sudden cardiac arrest?
There were 4.5 years.
So you were dealing with epilepsy for a long time before that happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and almost 5 years. Yeah. So I'd kind of changed my whole life around epilepsy, and I thought, this was my cross to bear. And I was all like, oh, woe is me, epilepsy. And like, I didn't even know. Even know what was coming.
Well, you got a dog, a husband, you left DC for Virginia.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You had a lot of bright spots.
Yeah. That's the thing. I started to kind of figure out how can I make a life that I want. It's not the life I had chosen before. I have different needs, but I met those needs. And I think although already independence had taken a hit, right? But there was an independence in just the fact that I was able to find a way forward and ask for what I needed and, surround myself with people who could be there for me, even if those were sometimes different people than they used to be. And yeah, I got my dog and trained him to help me with that. It allowed me to feel a lot safer, like going into the woods and hiking. And so, yeah, I changed my career. I went back to working for the federal government, and I successfully made like all those changes and was kind of starting to get comfy in this new life.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a moment when your life changed and you call this your second life. You were working at your desk at home. Then what happened?
Yeah. I don't know. So the next thing that happened for me was I was in a lot of pain and I couldn't stand up, and a surgery had just happened. Wasn't entirely clear what that surgery had been. Someone was trying to stand me in front of an x-ray machine, but I fell down. The next thing I know, which wasn't right after, so I don't know what happened in between, I was in bed and in a lot of pain, and it started making me shake. Like it was so painful. I don't think it was a seizure. I think I just started shaking from pain, and a nurse came over and I think gave me meds because then I go black again. And then my brother was there, and then I was at home. Like that's what happened in my world. But I've been told that I said, oh shit. And
appropriate words.
Yeah. My husband, I think that's hilarious. I thought that was so surprising, but I guess I must have had some warning to say that. But when my husband heard me fall, he was right across the hall, which is the luckiest thing ever. And he heard me fall. He was already kind of on high alert because I'd had one seizure a week before. And that was the first I'd had since I'd known him. It was the first seizure in 4.5 years. So my meds had worked well. So we were already kind of on edge, which is maybe why he was paying attention. But he runs in, I'm having a seizure on the floor, except something that's not supposed to happen with a normal seizure is I started turning blue. So he called 911, started CPR. We live very close to the fire station. And it actually has a really loud siren. It's old school, it's small town. And so they sounded this blaring siren every time the truck leaves, which happens more than you'd probably think for such a small town. But he had always hated on this siren. And now he does not complain. And we call it like the sound of life, you know, but yeah, they got to my house in 4 minutes.
Wow.
And the EMTs took over. A female EMT who walked in the room saw me lying there, and she's about my same age. I talked to her a bunch now, but she just said, no, not today. Like, she's not dying on my block. And she was relentless. I mean, she just insisted, like, they keep going. They do all this stuff. She fought to get me on a helicopter to get me where I needed to go. Like, I don't know all the ins and outs, but she is widely credited as, like, she put her foot down. And they did the life-saving techniques long after it's kind of surprising because it was 24 minutes that I didn't have a heartbeat. And I read the report, like the full report they had to submit after this terrible day. And like, they shocked me 4 times, but I wasn't coming back. And my heart went into what's usually one of the final stages. So a lot of times people think you just immediately flatline, but actually your heart usually, and I had I forget what it's called, but my heart started going really fast and it was very erratic. So my heart went into what's called PEA, or pulseless electrical activity, which is usually a bad sign. I mean, you can't shock anymore. It's not going to do anything. And they continued to give me air through whatever CPR or whatever advanced techniques they have. So my brain was getting oxygen the whole time. And that's why I'm talking to you right now, because the CPR was started so quickly by my husband. They got there so quickly, and we're doing that the whole time that my heart was out of commission. Then, from there, it was just like craziness trying to get me to a trauma center. We live in a rural area, so it involved a helicopter ride, and I was in a coma for 2 days. They did the therapeutic hypothermia at the trauma center, which is, I found fascinating to learn about, but they lower your body temperature so that when your heart's beating again, you can come back to life a little bit more slowly. It doesn't overwhelm your system as much. So there are fewer long-term impacts. But even for those 2 days, my husband was told, she's probably not coming back. And I don't think no one was expecting me to come back, but especially to leave, as they termed it in the notes, neurologically intact, was a shocker. But the surgery that I remember, that was the defibrillator being implanted. I don't remember signing for it. Apparently I did. But my husband felt strongly that I not leave without it. And then got pretty strange for a while.
Yeah. It sounds like without that EMT really being your advocate, they could have declared you dead at any point in those 24 minutes.
Yeah, I think so. There's even an odd point in the report where it just says, they'd done the 4th attempt as a shock, and it kept saying resuscitation efforts continue, which I guess means the CPR or whatever. And then there's like, nothing happened for 2 minutes, and they're like, resuscitation continue. Like, why? And it said, PEA was, so my heart was in that final stage in it. Then they just said resuscitation continue. And you could just see where like they didn't even know what to do anymore, but they just wouldn't stop.
Well, CPR can be kind of brutal, violent even.
Yeah, I was shocked you didn't have like broken ribs or anything after, because you hear about that.
Yeah. But you mentioned an injury from intubation?
Yeah. So, yep. So they had the tube in, and I don't remember that part, or even when they took it out. But I guess for a while I couldn't swallow. Like I think they have to jam it in pretty quick. It did something on the way out or whatever. And I kept failing swallow tests. So they couldn't give me food for a while. I had to just have like juice and mashed stuff. And then I graduated to I was drinking out of a straw for can't remember, at least a month after leaving the ICU. I just couldn't swallow properly. So like I would choke if I tried, and my vocal cords were wrecked too for a while. I'm so glad I can speak now. I don't think about that enough. I take it for granted again. Mental note to really feel the gratitude about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So all this intervention in your dying process, it brings up a question about consent. If you are unconscious or in a coma, what is consent to you?
Yeah, I don't think I get to, I mean, at that point, as far as I am concerned, I live in a society. I also have a family, and my husband and my father were there by my side. And, you know, a lot of the decisions at that point were made by my husband, which I think is as it should be. At times, I wondered if I really want this defibrillator in my body. And eventually I'll get to decide whether I take it out or not. But at the time, you know, he had to deal with so much. You know, we're talking about me and my experience, but like the PTSD from having to try to save your spouse, think you're watching your spouse die in your arms, like the days in the ICU for him, like, so yeah, consent would be nice, but I was in no condition. I mean, at that point, my life was up to other people. If I had already been through something like this and had a DNR and my doctor knew about it, well, that's different, but I didn't. And I mean, people wanted to fight, from that EMT to all the doctors that, you know, were incredible at what they did, clearly. And my husband.
Do you have a DNR now?
So I do, but I haven't actually given it to my doctor. So, and my husband and I are in talk because he is not happy about it. And I have mixed feelings. And I guess where I keep coming back to it, like, look, if I'm unconscious, I want it to be easy for him to do what he needs to do. He knows I don't want to be a vegetable, and I don't want to go through, you know, a much worse. Like, I got so lucky in this situation, and it was still really hard. So there's a limit to how much more I would want to go through, because I don't, yeah, it was hard enough. And I can just imagine now, like, how easily it could have gone so much worse.
So you wrote your book shortly after you almost died, which, understanding just how debilitated you probably were,
Mm-hmm.
it makes it even more impressive. You're a little further away from that experience now. Has your perspective shifted at all?
A little bit. I agree with everything I said at the time. It was important to me to write it at that moment while I was still struggling. I wanted to not shy away from sharing the rock bottom that I hit after the cardiac arrest. That felt really important. And I'm so glad that I did it. I'm not in a darker place right now. After publishing even, I started seeing some real recovery physically, which has been awesome. And emotionally, like, the PTSD is just so much less than even a year ago. And so as I continue to recover, and then I start to reacclimate and like decide who I'm going to be in the second life, it's not as terrible and or sad as that once was. And like, I'm back in school now. I'm doing an MS in clinical mental health counseling, and I'm hoping to become a therapist working with other people with chronic illness. So I think as far as meaning making, like, I can see the positives and how this can help me help others, how it can play into a much better story. But when I wrote the book, I didn't know what the second life was really going to entail. And I was really feeling the mortality and the vulnerability. And so, you know, that's more what that book is about. And I'll have to write another one here when things are brighter. And I do hope to write at some point about like recovery and what that means if you have something like I do, where you don't ever get cured medically. What does recovery look like in that scenario?
Well, I look forward to reading it. But I do see a through line in your life, and you're almost already a therapist because you've had so much time with people in the hairstylist
Yeah.
chair.
Yeah. That was the best training. I mean, honestly, I think people might look at my career path and think, oh, the consulting or the group facilitation. And like that stuff, that was helpful. But actually, the one-on-one, the client conversations, just listening to people's stories all day. I mean, yeah, I'm just glad I'm finally getting the training so that I'll be, I'll be able to, do a better job of listening and helping. Because before, I mean, I could listen, but there wasn't much I could do.
Yeah. We briefly mentioned your husband earlier. And in the context of building your life together, you wrote that you found more independence because you had the safety and security of dependence.
Yeah.
That's a full circle moment.
Yeah. I don't know. It gets pretty philosophical, right? Because I guess in a sense, we're all dependent in so many ways on so many things. I'm like, I guess if I didn't have him, there would be other things I'd have to depend on just to get by. But I mean, I guess without him in that scenario, I just would be dead. But yeah, I don't even know. I mean, sorry, I just started going 10 different directions in my head thinking about Chris. He's such a monumental person in my life. Everything would be different without him having entered that random way that he did.
Well, there may be no words.
Yeah.
There may be no language for what you're feeling right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so are you exploring religion? And what's that journey look like?
I've been going to some Quaker meetings in my town. Before that, she's no longer at the church. She retired, but there was a really awesome pastor at my local Episcopal church. I like the Episcopal church too, but I just kind of drifted over for right now. I have actually always been pretty interested in religion, and I've definitely sampled throughout my life and kind of worked my way around. So I guess I would say now that I have a sort of faith, and I would say that I pray, but I guess my beliefs are a little more amorphous and less prescriptive than a lot of organized religion, which is, I think, why I feel at home when I'm meditating with the Quakers and sitting in silence. I often feel like the words can be helpful, and I definitely like praying with other people, but sometimes I feel like the words can also get in the way. And sitting in silence is kind of my way to reattach to that moment or I guess 24 minutes or whatever, where I was in a sort of peaceful other place. My association with that time is peaceful. When I'm really struggling, I go to the spot on the floor where I had the cardiac arrest. So they clearly mean something to me, even though I don't remember any specifics about it. And for some reason, like meditation and sitting quietly seems to be the closest way for me to kind of reattach to that feeling of connection, loss of self that happened in my cardiac arrest.
Connection to spirit.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. There was something very special about the time you were down for 24 minutes. And it wasn't, the light at the end of the tunnel that some people describe in an NDE, but it was certainly something you're going back to now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, it was very comforting, I guess is the right way to describe it. And that's why I seek out that spot when I'm struggling. For me, like the PTSD and the trauma was all about what happened after I woke up. Waking up in that hospital was scary. Realizing that everything was wrong with me was scary. Like I only have this positive feeling when I'm in that room and I didn't feel light or see a loved one who'd already passed or anything like that. But I kind of feel like I dissolved, and there's something very freeing. Like independence was like the whole first half of my life. And it's kind of exhausting, and to suddenly feel like there's no boundary between you and everything else because you're on your way out and you're cells are going to rejoin throughout the world, and it's not going to be, your carbon isn't going to be embodied in this one form. But there's a release and a freedom, and I felt welcomed. So I can't explain that. I can't justify it, but I definitely don't fear death after that.
We'll wrap today, and I'd just like to ask you, what does a peaceful exit mean to you?
So I love this question, and I thought about it a lot knowing that I'd be on here. And it really depends, like, whose perspective am I thinking about it from? Because I had a peaceful beginning of the exit, I guess, before I was really brought back. I'm very grateful, but still, that would have been a peaceful exit, right? I didn't even know it was going to happen. There was no time for warning and anxiety. I was not in pain. I was just gone. And I just became not me as you know me now, but me, part of the universe. That was great. That was not peaceful from my husband's perspective. I mean, he saw me in absolute distress, my whole body just completely sounding the alarm. It's a grotesque process to shut down that way. So the people who were trying to save me, the doctor, that would not have been peaceful for them had I died that way. So, and I think you have to keep that in mind, because I'm me, but I don't only matter to me, right? You have to kind of look at it from all different perspectives. It's not only about the person dying, it's also the family and the community they live in.
Beautifully said. I loved our conversation.
Me too, Sarah.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been great. I learned a lot. It really made me think.
Well, take good care.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Peaceful Exit. I'm your host, Sarah Kavanaugh. You can find me on Instagram at @peacefulexit, and you can learn more about this podcast at peacefulexit.net. Our senior producer and editor is Katie Klein. Our sound engineer is Sean Simmons. Additional support from Cindy Gall and Sierra Austin. Original music provided by Ricardo Russell, with additional music and sounds from Blue Dot Sessions. If you'd like to support our show, please follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Rate and review us wherever you listen. It really does make a difference. And as always, thank you so much for listening.